All right, Jigsaw, it's time to get down to brass tacks when it comes down to insulin. Insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance, and insulin as a flat-out hormone that dictates whether or not we burn fat or we store it. So let's get into the details. It has to do with a couple of different hormones, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to focus on insulin because I feel like it's extremely important that you have a solid understanding of what insulin does in the body so that you can understand how you can get the most out of your diet and the most out of your life in general. So first and foremost, insulin is produced by the beta cells within the pancreas. And it's triggered as a response to any kind of food consumption, generally speaking, glucose, okay? So you consume carbohydrates, they get broken down into glucose by your digestive system. And once you have glucose floating around in the bloodstream, insulin opens up the cells to allow the glucose in. Now, insulin doesn't just affect specific cells. You see, insulin generally affects both the muscle cells, the liver cells, but it also affects the fat cells as well. And that's the thing. A lot of people don't realize that insulin does affect fat cells and can actually cause them to store more free fatty acids and get bigger and get larger. That's one of the biggest problems that we face today. So now we know that insulin's job is to take that blood glucose and put it into the cell for energy. Well, if insulin isn't functioning well, then of course we have too much blood glucose, which can lead to a lot of different things. Which leads me into two things I want to talk about: insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. But hear me out through the entirety of this video because I'm going to break down exactly what you can do to start getting your insulin working in your favor so you can get in the best shape of your life. Okay. So if you don't produce enough insulin, or if your cells are immune to insulin and don't respond well to it, that leaves you with a lot of excess glucose in the bloodstream. Well, what can that lead to? It can lead to storage. So believe it or not, insulin can also regulate what is stored as fat and what is stored in the cells. So let's focus on insulin resistance for a second because it plays a role. Insulin resistance is when you are so accustomed to having insulin at so many different times of the day that your body stops responding to it or slows down in terms of response to it. In fact, there was even a study that took a look at some interesting stuff. The Journal of Diabetes and Its Complication did a two-part study, and ultimately what they found over the course of two separate time periods was about 32 to 33% of all people are insulin resistant. Not necessarily just diabetics, but all people. Now, how does this play into you? Well, most of the time we just think of diabetics as being insulin resistant. But the fact is, you can become somewhat insulin resistant without being diabetic. And that can lead to a lot of things, like poor absorption of nutrients, poor glucose delivery, and of course, elevated blood glucose, which leads to a multitude of different things. But what about for fat storage? Okay, you see, when your body doesn't respond well to insulin, your pancreas has to produce more of it. And this is the thing that people don't always talk about. The more insulin that your body has to produce, the less fat burning that occurs. Every single time that you eat something, you're generally secreting insulin, unless you're only eating high protein, high fat. Okay? But generally speaking, you're always producing insulin when you eat. Well, this insulin shuts off the fat burning mechanism within your body. And when that happens, well, do the math. You're not burning fat. So if your body has to consistently produce more and more insulin because it's trying to respond to the fact that your cells are insulin resistant, well, there you go. Your body's never really getting into that optimal fat burning stage. Now, what exactly is causing this insulin resistance? Well, for one, it's just eating too many calories flat out. You're constantly consuming food, so your body's becoming immune to the insulin that's supposed to let the sugar into the cell. So a lot of scientists believe that it has to do with something known as intra fat accumulation. What this is fatty acid metabolites that build up inside the muscle cells that basically block the absorption of insulin. How does this happen? Well, years of combining fats and carbohydrates together will cause this. Every time you spike your insulin with a high sugar or carbohydrate-rich food, and you have fat in the equation as well, i.e. something like a donut, you're opening up the muscle cell to insulin and glucose, but you're also opening it up to fat. Those fatty acids go into the muscle cell, and there you have it. You have that intramyocellular fatty acid accumulation, making it so that the cell does not respond well to insulin. Therefore, next time you eat, your body has to produce more and more and more insulin. Think of it as like a door to a building that just gets thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. And in order to batter it down, you need a bigger battering ram. That's the way insulin in your cells work. So that leads me to the next side of the equation, which is insulin sensitivity. It's essentially the opposite of insulin resistance. I want you to think of it like this. If insulin resistance is a super thick door that barely lets anything in unless you have a big battering ram, then being insulin sensitive is like barely having a screen door. It allows the cell to absorb things that you eat with very little resistance, okay? Very little force is required, very little amounts of insulin. Why is this a good thing? Well, the more sensitive to insulin that you are, the less insulin you produce. The less insulin you produce, the more fat you're able to burn. Because remember, it's very hard, if not impossible, for you to burn fat in the presence of insulin. So if that's the case, you want to keep your insulin levels as low as possible. Then, when you do consume food, your body's going to absorb it, your cells are going to absorb it, and you're going to feel and look a heck of a lot better. So this is great. You now know what insulin is, you know what insulin resistance is, and you know what insulin sensitivity is. But how do you take action and put a plan into effect here? Well, I've got a couple of solutions for you. One is going to be intermittent fasting now and then. Okay, simply by reducing the amount of food that you consume and going periods of time where you're not consuming food, it allows those beta cells in the pancreas to relax a little bit, but it also allows the intracellular fatty acids that have accumulated to leave the cell, start being burned, so that the cell can be more receptive to insulin. Now, another thing that you can do is temporary carbohydrate fasting. Basically, a short stint of ketosis that doesn't even put you fully into ketosis. You can go 2 to 3 days of restricting carbs as much as you possibly can, keeping fats moderately high, basically just allowing yourself to become more insulin sensitive. Now, a perfect example, a lot of bodybuilders or fitness competitors do this, but they don't generally know the science as to why they're doing it. Basically, what you're doing is you're depleting just enough so that your body can rebound and be a lot more sensitive. You can apply this in your everyday life by doing a carb starvation for really just 2 or 3 days out of the course of a month. And lastly, for all you magnesium gurus out there, magnesium plays a critical role in keeping your insulin sensitivity high. And it does this simply because of an intracellular enzyme known as tyrosine kinase. Okay? Tyrosine requires magnesium to allow insulin to do its job in terms of lowering blood glucose. There have been a multitude of studies that have linked magnesium to lower blood glucose levels. But in this case, we're talking about just becoming more insulin sensitive so that you can get the most out of your food, but also get the most out of every single thing you do in your life. So keep it locked in here with Jigsaw, and as always, I'll see you in the next Science Saturday.